Hey, everybody, it's Tommy Canale. Please go to our website, beforethelightspod.com. Over there, you can get all the episodes, show notes, contact information if you want to reach out to us via email, and how to become members of our Patreon community. Go follow us on Instagram at Before the Lights Podcast. And if you have a couple minutes, head over to Apple Podcast. Please rate and review the show. 5 stars, nice comments are always appreciated. Welcome to Before the Lights, the show to find out how those in sports, music, and entertainment made their mark. Let's get this one started, everybody. Go get yourself a coffee or grab a drink. Tell your family, friends, neighbors, and strangers the show is starting. Today, we have an American-Israeli former professional basketball star, the recipient of Mr. Basketball in the state of Illinois. He's an experienced radio and TV analyst and is an Israeli citizen. He is a 6'9" scoring machine, the all-time leading scorer for the Fighting Illini from Chicago, Illinois. Please welcome Deon Thomas. Deon, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot, Tommy. Hey, man, that's a heck of an intro, man. I really appreciate it.
You are most welcome. You grew up in Chicago on the west side in something called The Village. If you would explain to our listeners, A, what The Village is, and B, what it was like growing up there.
Well, The Village is a part of the southwest side, and it starts near, I guess it's Halstead on Roosevelt, and it stretches across to Ashland and, Roosevelt and Ashland, which is not a very big area. It's about a mile stretch, a square mile. And it's not a very good area. I mean, it's just one of those areas that, I wouldn't raise my kids in, even though I grew up there. But I'm very thankful for the struggles that my grandparents, great-grandparents, and my parents went through that allowed me to branch out. But I learned a lot of lessons in the village, man. And a lot of them have helped transform my life, have helped make me who I am, who gave me the grit to continue to fight and struggle to be better. And actually gave me a lot of lessons. As I just mentioned to you, I have 2 daughters, one 20 and one 16. And I'm still handing out the lessons today that I learned from the village so long ago.
And Deon, talk to me about, you mentioned about your family, but what your mother and grandparents and how they shaped Deon Thomas to what he is today.
Well, they handed out lessons in different ways. My mother was all three. My grandparents were extremely important to me, especially my grandmothers. I was raised in a family with very strong women, which has, I believe, helped make me a well-rounded person. Because where I grew up, there's some expressions say, if you soft, you lost. So spent a lot of my childhood with my cousins and my brothers, fighting because of, various reasons. So again, there were some areas that you could have very easily have become a statistic,
Sure.
Whether it's going to prison or whether it's going into an early grave. And my mother, who had both, and as a matter of fact, she has a book coming out soon. Her life was amazing. She had 2 kids by the time she was 19 years old. She had my older brother when she was 15. She had me when she was 19. I mean, it kind of a running joke was I'm the only kid probably in America to graduate from high school twice, because when she walked across the stage at Crane High School, she was pregnant with me. And so she had to learn the hard way, because my grandmother, her mother, Eleanor Turner, wasn't one of these, okay, well, I'm going to take care of your kids. She was, no, you have to go to school, you got to graduate, you got to get a job so you can take care of your own children. And that's what my mother did from, like I said, an extremely early age. To her, education was extremely important. So she was really tough on myself and my older brother at that time when we lived on the west side. My younger brother is 6.5 years younger than I am. But she was very tough and disciplined. And then you would think, the other head of that coin is you have your grandparents who might be loving and caring, which they were, but they were also realists. And they understood that we had to, 1, be educated, 2, learn the street and how to live in it. As my mother would often tell us, you have to learn how to walk on both sides of a fence. When it's time to be this way, you have to understand and you have to be able to speak like you're in a boardroom. And when you're on this side, you have to understand the little cues and things that you have to take place in when you're living in our community that you have to know, because if not, you can get yourself in a world of trouble. Or worse, you can get caught in between someone else's trouble. So you really have to be able to see the whole field. Is where a lot of our teachings were coming up. I mean, a lot of that was how you deal with the police, because I joked with some people and I was telling them I had never seen very many white people in my community until I went to the University of Illinois.
That would make sense.
Exactly. The only white people I saw in my neighborhood were the police, and a lot of people talk about a lot of the situations that are going on today. For me, it's like, okay, well, this has been happening all my life. There just weren't video cameras and all of these things to put it, out there. I mean, these things have been taken care of for, forever.
And Deon, as a young child or a youth, you were really into baseball. And from doing some research, I understand your brother is basically the one that recruited you into basketball.
He was my first recruit. Coming up in our area, as I mentioned, my parents, my mother and my grandparents were always trying to find outlets for us. So in our local YMCA, I became a Cub Scout, and that didn't last very long because it was just, I don't know, just wasn't a whole lot going on, because we weren't going on the trips, the camping trips and those things. We were basically just meeting at the YMCA and doing nothing. And so I gravitated to baseball, because they also had a youth baseball league. So I played baseball from the time maybe I was 6, 7 years old, up until it was time for me to go to high school. And as you mentioned, that was because of my older brother. So by this time, we had moved to Inglewood on Chicago's South Side, and I joined a park baseball team over at Hamilton Park. So one day I'm walking home after a game, and my older brother's out on the basketball court, and he's playing, and they needed an extra player to play 5-on-5. So he called me over, and he was like, hey, I need you to play with us so we can play 5-on-5. Now, of course, I knew nothing about basketball. That was really the first time I had ever played basketball. And after the games were completed, we're walking home, and my brother was like, you need to stop playing baseball. And I'm like, why would I stop playing baseball? I love baseball. I mean, to this day, I love baseball. And he was like, because you don't understand how good you are. And I'm in 8th grade at this time. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He was like, Deon. He was like, you're really good. He was like, the guys we were playing against out there on the basketball court? I'm like, no. But they were some Chicago legends. Al Frederick Hughes was out there. Al Frederick played many years. He was, I think he led the nation in scoring when he was at Loyola. His older brother, Chris Hughes, who was playing basketball in Europe at the time. Darryl Liberty, who was Marcus Liberty's older brother. And, some other people that were out there on the court, but they were all high school and, college or professional players. And here I am, a 6'2", 6'3", 8th grader that had never played a game before. My brother's like, Deon, you're really good. So we got home and he told my mom, well, Deon's not playing baseball anymore. And I looked up to my older brother, so I kind of followed what he said, which I'm glad I did.
Good thing he got you into basketball. In 1988, you were at the Chicago Simeon. You win the public league title. If you would talk to me about, I understand being from Illinois, but I want my listeners to understand how difficult winning the public league is. And on top of that, afterwards, if you would hit on playing for legendary Coach Bob Hambric.
Oh, sure. Can I take those in reverse order?
Sure, absolutely.
Because I have to admit, again, like I said, I went into 8th grade having never really played organized basketball before. And Bob Hambric was a man that was very disciplined. He had a lot of focus. He was very driven for, to make a better life for not just his players, but anyone he really came into contact with. So coming in, he really pushed me. And I didn't realize at the time how hard he was pushing me because, again, I had never been coached. I didn't realize what any of those things were. And so he was really tough on me. And he was really tough on me. And he later on told me it was because I had talent and because I was good. And he was the first coach that I had heard say, well, don't worry about if the coach is yelling at you. You worry about it if he's being quiet and if he's not talking to you. Because then he doesn't see something in you or he doesn't care. So with Coach Hambric riding my back, with Coach Hambric teaching me the fundamentals of the game. Everyone has heard Tim Duncan's nickname, the Big Fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me say I had that nickname in Chicago before. Tim Duncan's like 6-7 years younger than me. So probably before he even stepped on the high school team. And all of that was because of Coach Hambric. I mean, he literally takes you, took you, built the foundation, and then built the rest of the house on top of it. And that's what he did, not just for me, but for every player that came through, which culminated in that city championship in 1988. Now, one of the things that everyone should understand, your fans probably know most of the AAU stuff now. At that time, there was no AAU.
No.
So you had your high school team, you had the high school tournaments that you played with your team. Then you had the city, your city tournament for your in-season, and then your state tournament. The city tournament, the Chicago Public League city tournament, was more important to us than even winning the state tournament. That may sound crazy for some people to believe.
But that's the way it was.
Exactly. You and I both understand the best teams, especially at that time, were coming out of Chicago. And only one team at that time came out of Chicago because you only had Class A and Class 2A. And that was it. So you didn't have all of the classes and the breakdowns that they do now. So if you won the Class A title, you were the best team in the state, regardless of what happened downstate, because anybody can lose one game, and that's the way that state tournament ended up being. But getting out of beating the best teams in Chicago, whether it was Kings, the Cranes, the Marshalls, that's when you knew you had made it. And our junior year, which is 88, man, it was a dogfight. I mean, there's always our arch rival was Kings. And so we just had to fight through them and get a win. Of course, they had players like Marcus Liberty, Jamie, Brandon, and unfortunately, Coach Landon Cox, just passed away here recently. But he always had great talent on his team. And Simeon was always a great team because that's the way Coach Hambric made it. Your individual accolades were not really that important. It was all team focused and how you played as a team. So it was big for us to be able to go out there and get that win. And, for me, then and now, having played for Bob Hambric, I can't be more appreciative because I don't know if I'm where I am now without him.
He has shaped many, many Chicago kids into becoming legends. You're just, one of the long list of people want to, and we'll put a link in the show notes of some of the things, players that were at Chicago. Simeon. A year later, 1989, you are the number 3 player ranked nationally. You're a parade All-American, and you're named Mr. Basketball, and you're a McDonald's All-American. Before I get into the McDonald's All-American game, how did you find out that you were awarded Mr. Basketball?
Well, actually, Coach Hambric told me. And he was, and this is the kind of guy he was. I mean, and I love him for it. You mentioned being ranked number 3 in the nation. So, of course, going my freshman year, sophomore year, I don't know any of these things, because that wasn't my world. Going into my junior year, senior year, of course, now you're paying attention to the different rankings and these things because, of course, you play well, you get college. And my main focus was making sure that I got my college education because this was the main focus of my mother and my grandparents were, you're going to school, you're going to college. My mother had a rule for us as my brother and I was growing up. And she told us, she was like, at the age of 18 or upon graduation, you're doing one of 2 things. and both of them meaning that you're getting out of my house. So she was like, either you're going to college or you're going to the military. But either way, you are leaving here. So knowing I didn't want to go to the military, I was, I had fought enough just to grow up in my neighborhood. I had heard enough gunshots and things of that nature in my neighborhood, knowing that that was not something that I wanted to do. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I got to figure out how I'm getting to college. And that's where sports came in. But getting back to Coach Hambric, that was his push. So now I'm starting to pay more attention. And he would always tell us, including myself, don't read the newspaper. Don't pay attention to what journalists write. He was like, or when they're interviewing you. He was like, because there's one or two things that could come from that. Either, and he was like, and both of them are not very good. He was like, either you can listen to them and you'll stop working hard on getting better, or you will listen to them and you'll feel bad about the things that they're saying about you. He said, so concentrate on getting better every day and not worrying about these other things. So, of course, 17-year-old kid, I'm still reading all of the all of the magazines to see where it is. I'm looking at, Kenny Anderson ranked above me. I'm looking at Shaquille O'Neal being ranked above me. And then there's a whole host of extremely good players that are behind me. And so I'm like, all right, Coach, this is the summer before when they had all of the camps in New York. So I'm like, Coach, I want to go to this camp. It was the ABCD camp, which was, I think it was put on by Adidas at that time.
I agree.
And he was like, no. And I'm like, Coach, I'm going to lose my ranking. Why can't I go? He was like, because they're meat markets. He was like, I can guarantee you're not going to lose your ranking. You come in here every day, you concentrate on working and getting better, and you will be fine. So I have to say again, Bob Hambric was right. Because at that time, when we had that conversation, I was ranked 4th in the nation. And after they finished the ABCD camp, I ended up 3rd. So go figure. I mean, the guy's clairvoyant.
The McDonald's All-American game, you were just one of a few people that were actually undecided of where they were going to go to college. And for you, I think it came down to Iowa or Illinois. What was the deciding factor for you to go, I'm going to go to University of Illinois and play for another legendary coach in Lou Henson?
Well, at that time, there were actually, I had it down to a top 5.
Okay.
And you're right. I was definitely unclear about where I wanted to go. But it was Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, UCLA, and Arizona. And the deciding factor was really, I sat down with my grandmother. And by this time, my mother's life had kind of taken a turn for the worse. She had a really, really bad drug habit, as most of the people, a lot of the people where I'm from had. So she wasn't in the picture at all. So I was seeking counsel, and Coach Hambric wasn't one of the people that would try to influence you where you went. He would try to get you to make your own decision on where you went to school. So I was left with my grandmother to help me decide this.
Okay.
Now, my mother's mom had passed away by that time, so I didn't have her counsel. So I just had my dad's mom. And so we talked through the schools. And it was basically this. Arizona and UCLA are too far away, because she wasn't going to fly, so she would have never had the opportunity of watching me play. I took my visit to the University of Minnesota, where we walked through the tunnels, and they showed me how I was going to get to class in the wintertime. So that kind of scratched them out, because I'm like, okay, I come from Chicago and it's cold and we got snow, but I have to walk through a tunnel in order to get to class. So that means Minnesota is way too cold. and then it came down to Illinois and Iowa. And my grandmother, man, I don't know if I've met a better person in my life. I don't know if I've ever met a better person. One that, I mean, the neighborhood knew when she would walk down the street, everyone spoke to Ms. Bernice, because she would give you her very last. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional over here. She
completely
passed
understand.
Away back in she passed away in 1994, but I'd never met a better person in my life and a better judge of character and of people than I'd ever met in my life. And the first thing she told me, as we were having this conversation, we're going down the line of schools, and I got to Iowa, and she had never met Dr. Tom Davis, but she had met Bruce Pearl on multiple occasions.
Okay.
And she was like, Deon, I don't trust him. She was like, I don't like his eyes. I do not trust him. I said, okay. And we moved on to Illinois, which she had met Coach Henson, and she had met Coach Collins, of course. She felt extremely comfortable with Coach Henson, and she felt really, really comfortable with Jimmy Collins. And that was my deciding factor. If she wasn't feeling it, then I wasn't feeling it.
Couldn't have gone wrong. I mean, when you have two coaches like Coach Collins and Coach Henson that you're going to go play for at University of Illinois to help further your career. And you stay there for 4 years, you get your degree, and you are listed in the U of I record books. And for my listeners, I'll put another link for all this, but just going to read off some stuff. We're going to get to the all-time leading scorer, but to kind of get in the perspective of how broad your game is, first in made field goals, second in made free throws, third in field goal percentage, fourth in rebounds, and eighth in total minutes played in all-time Fighting Illini history. And you're the all-time leading scorer with 2,129 points at an 18 points per game average. The other thing that I found really interesting, Deon, was 177 shot blocks or block shots. And in these days, you just don't see the art of shot blocking anymore. Was that something that you were taught back at Simeon, or did you kind of have a green light when you got to Illinois to kind of start going up and altering shots?
Well, I would have to say, I think, there were conversations I would have with Bob Hambric back in the day as far as shot blocking. And shot blocking is really a skill and it's timing. So it's one of those things that I have to say was a God-given talent, but you still have to be taught how to use it, when to use it, which situations as far as blocking shots. So I averaged, I believe it was my senior year, almost a triple-double. I averaged 8 block shots a game, 7 or 8, somewhere up in there. So that basically carried over to Illinois, and it was really just timing and really studying your other player or the player you're defending, and knowing how to be in the right place when you're in help defense. Because a lot of those were on the ball block shots, which Coach Henson would also tell me you're one of the best on ball shot blockers I've ever seen. But that came from studying, and that came from his preparation, because we knew, you've heard everyone's heard, Coach Henson is one of these players, the coaches that's done the least with the most talent, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe any of that stuff. I think it's crazy talk, because he's one of the best coaches I've ever played for. And I'm not saying that, when I was at Illinois, and I can be honest, Coach and I didn't have a great relationship. But that's just how things were at that time. The head coach was the head coach. You had the buffer with the assistant coaches, and then you had the players, managers, so forth and so on. So he was the one that was sitting at the top of the heap. But now, I love coaching, and the relationship that we've built up over time when, my time leaving Illinois, I learned a lot. I learned even more from him than I did when I was there. But we were always prepared, and everyone gets a scouting report. College coaches today do scouting reports, but our scouting reports were detailed, specifically for me or for Andy Petty or Andy Kaufman or any of my players, because this is the guy you need to know. The guys you need to know, this is what they do. This is how they do it. It wasn't a general scouting. And I really knew the go-to moves for the other players. And I just made, exactly. And so I just knew if this guy likes to shoot a turnaround jump shot, does he do pump fakes or whatever else? And so now I can take that knowledge and put it with, an innate talent to block shots. And it worked out, especially, you mentioned 6'9", That's the lie they told in the book. I'm not 6'9" on a good day. It never was. But I did have long arms. I had good talent, good timing, and I was a heck of an athlete. Quick jumper.
In 1994, you're selected by the Dallas Mavericks in the second round, 28th pick overall. You attend the Mavs minicamp, and then you opt to play professionally in Europe and Israel. You were there from 1994 to 2008. You started in Spain, 13 teams in 14 years, 6 countries, 7-time All-Star. Before we get into the decision, Deon, to go there, or maybe this was already there, what was your thoughts prior to the draft? Were you already thinking overseas, or were you waiting to see where you got drafted?
It's actually a great question, which no one has really asked me what my thought process was before. And that'll actually lead into, not lead into, but take you back to something that I said before.
Okay.
Basketball for me, now I've had teammates both in high school and college, and, that would say that was their life. Basketball to me was never my life. It was an ends to a means. So saying that, the NBA was never my main focus. Not that I didn't care about basketball. I loved playing basketball. I loved the competition of basketball. I loved going against other people and the other teams. So that's what really fed me and fueled me. It wasn't necessarily the NBA or bust, I guess to say. So my senior year at Simeon, we had an opportunity along with the Marshall girls basketball team, to travel to Europe. So we traveled to Amsterdam, where we played against their B-level teams, even some of their A-level teams, and I fell in love with all of the things that I was seeing, the way of life, the people, the food, not so much. It was okay. But, I thought our food was better here. But all of those experiences, I was like, man, and I knew that there was a time that I would want to travel back to Europe. So fast forward to draft night, and you mentioned I get drafted by the Mavericks, second round, where I got a story. I'm sorry, I got to tell this story. My grandmother, junior year at Illinois, I have people telling me, well, Deon, you're a first-round lottery pick. If you go back and look at the stats, I think that was the year of my highest point average and all of this stuff. So I had people telling me, hey, you're guaranteed first-round pick, possible lottery pick. So I called my grandmother, and I'm like, Granny, this is what they're saying. I can go in this draft. We can make this amount of money. We can do this. We can do that. She says, okay. She says, well, will you have your degree? I said, no, I'm going to have to go back, and do one more year and get my degree. She was like, then you're not going.
Brought back down a little reality check right there.
Exactly. I mean, it brought down really quickly. She was 100% right. So junior year goes by, senior year comes, and I say, well, I get drafted. So we're going through the deal. My agent, Mark Bartelstein at Priority Sports, who was my agent my entire career, which is also a rarity today. We're sitting back, we're talking, it's the 11th hour. Not that Dallas was pressuring or anything of that nature, but he was like, okay, well, you have this on the table. These are the numbers. This is the deal. He's like, but I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't tell you about the offer that came in from Europe. So he tells me everything. Very, very good offers, comparable in some ways to what I was receiving in the NBA, and better in other ways, of course, because you don't pay taxes. I didn't have to pay for a house. I didn't have to buy a car and all those other things, which actually made it more lucrative in some ways. And so I called Jimmy Collins, and I'm like, Coach, I was like, this is what's going on. I got this offer from Dallas. This is here. And then I have this that just came up in Spain. And he told me something that has stuck with me. And I've told people this multiple times, during my coaching times, and even today, in my announcing days when I talk to college players. He was like, Deon, it's not about where you make your money. It's about doing what you want to do at the end of your career and not what you have to do.
Great advice.
So, and it stuck with me. And so I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to Spain. I wanted to see, be back there. I wanted to see the rest of the world. Gave me an opportunity to play in the EuroLeague tournament. Well, it wasn't EuroLeague at that time, but to play in the European tournament. So I would be traveling to different countries as well as playing in Spain. And then my thought process was to come back to the NBA the next year. Did that, made the All-Star team. They don't do a rookie of the year. At least they didn't at that time. But I believe I would have gotten it. Then I was one of the youngest guys there. But then 1995 came about, and that's when the NBA went on strike.
Right.
So when the NBA went on strike, I went back to Europe. Yeah, I went back to Europe, and then I ended up meeting not at that time, but I ended up meeting my soon-to-be wife, and that was that. We stayed there. I felt, like I said, I was already in love with being there anyway, but then I found my love, and my wife is from Israel. So we were in between her family, my family. I could bring my family over and have them experience some things that they had never had an opportunity to experience simply because we just didn't have the finances to do that. So I was able to bring my mother over, my brother over, several of my cousins that I was close to were able to come and go to Europe. And I really think that changed, not just my life, but it changed their lives as well. Because I was also the first person in my family to go and graduate from a 4-year institution. So I was kind of on the cusp and changing the lives of my family.
Is it safe to say then, Deon, that based on what I'm hearing, you get over there, you already had a love for Europe and that, and then you meet your wife, putting those two together, is it safe to say then that the NBA was just a second and afterthought from that point forward? You're like, this is where I want to be. I've met my wife. I don't really have any desire to go back to the NBA.
Yes, that would be very safe to say. Because that was my feeling. That was my thought process. I mean, I tell people, I was like, yeah, I'd come home. Coming back to the States was my vacation. Come back, I'd be home a month. I'm like, man, I'm a month on vacation. I'd take a week off and I'd get back to training. And then we were back in Europe 10, 11 months out of the year. And I really enjoyed it over there. I mean, I was very close to living there in Spain, that is, and in Israel.
And with every high, there's always some hurdles. And in 2005, you hit one. You had broke your leg. If you would, how did you break your leg? And then what was your mindset on coming back? Were you worried about, I may not ever be the same player again? Did you have some thoughts of, okay, this might be the end of my career? Where were you at with all that?
Well, let's start off with how it happened. I was in Maccabi Tel Aviv at the time. We were coming off winning our first European championship with, I can honestly say, the best team I've ever played with, and it played for. And we were going into the Final Four for the EuroLeague championship, and we were about to get ready to travel to Moscow. So in our last practice, before we were going to fly to Moscow, I go up for an offensive rebound. I tip the ball in, and all of my weight came down on my one leg, on my left leg. And it sounded like, you've broken a tree branch before. And that was the sound. That was the sound that it made. And I was immediately on the floor. It didn't hurt or anything like that. And I could tell something was wrong, but I didn't know what because I didn't feel anything. And when my teammates came over to see if I was okay, I mean, they literally all just, I hear everybody scream and run away.
That's not good.
So I'm holding my leg. No, not good at all. So I'm holding my leg, I'm laying on my back and my knee is bent and I could feel something hanging.
Oh.
And I was like, the only thing, and I don't know, I'm not going to use the words I would use, but it was an F word and I was like, not right now. I was like, why now? And I was saying why now? One, because we were preparing to go to the Final Four for the European Championship. And two, because I was coming off a really, really good season. And I had some teams that had already contacted my agent and, were throwing out, not that I wanted to leave Maccabi. I think I would have stayed in Maccabi, but, when you have a bargaining chip, you have a bargaining chip.
Sure.
So, Anthony Parker, who was my teammate at the time, he was holding my head and he was like, "It's going to be okay, Deon. It's going to be okay." And I looked at him. I said, "Yeah, I know." I was like, "That's okay." I was like, "I'm going to be fine, Anthony. I'm going to be fine." And they scooped me up off the floor. Our team doctor and trainer at the time, Rafi, was amazing. They put me in one of these big boots and they get me to the hospital. Our manager at the time, Moni Fanan, was his name. His daughter now is an agent and his son works for Maccabi. And he was like, "Baby, don't worry. We're going to take care of you." I say, "Okay, Moni, I'm good. This is okay." He thought I was in shock. I was like, "No, seriously, I'm fine. I'm okay." I was like, "Let's go get this taken care of." And so when we got there, the next day, they performed the surgery that night. The next morning, the doctor comes in and he's like, "How are you?" I was like, "I'm fine." I was like, "I just have one question for you." And he says, "What?" I say, "Is it over?" And he says, "Well, I'll tell you this. If you had broken it 2 inches lower, then it would be over." He's like, "But where the break is," he was like, "It's up to you." I said, "Okay, then I'll be back before the season starts." And we started doing rehab. It was really just with the band and foot movements. We started doing rehab that very day. And so you asked the question if I had ever thought that this was the end. No, not really. And I, I have to go back and give my thought process to my mother and to my grandparents. They always told us that it's never over unless you want it to be over. And, you are in control of what happens in your life. And of course, this wasn't the context of the conversation. At that time, there was about things you're doing in the neighborhood or not doing in the neighborhood that could get you either incarcerated or get you killed. So it's you have a choice of what happens to you in your life. So that was the same thing. Fast forward to that time, I was like, "Okay, doc, if there's nothing medically wrong, then I'll be back." And I was back physically. I wasn't back mentally. And that's the hurdle that I didn't realize that needed to be fixed at that time. But, like you mentioned, I went on to play several more years and had a successful close, I believe, out to a long career.
Absolutely. And then after your playing days were over, you get into coaching. You become the head coach and AD at Lewis and Clark Community College in Godfrey, Illinois, and then you're the assistant coach at UIC for a while. How was it transitioning from being a player and then now becoming a coach?
Very interesting. I did not plan on going into coaching.
Okay.
I won't say I knew exactly what I wanted to do. But if you listen to my wife and her cousins and several people, they always knew I was going into coaching. They were just waiting on me to discover the same thing that they already knew. We lived in Florida at the time with the 305 number. But we were living in Florida. I retired. So at this time, I'm not a big fan of Starbucks. I mean, I drink it down, but I wasn't a big fan of Starbucks coffee, especially after coming home from the coffee, the cafes in Europe.
It
didn't add up. So I'm in line, and a guy named Andre Torres touches me on my shoulder. I was coming from the gym, and he was like, "Hey," he was like, "I have a question for you." I'm like, "Yeah." We start talking. He's like, do you play basketball?" I was like, "No, not anymore. I just retired." He says, "Well, I've never coached before, and I've just taken over this head coaching position at this private high school." He was like, "Would you be interested in coming to help me?" I was like, "You know what?" I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." I was like, "No problem." So we go over, and it's called the University School in Fort Lauderdale. So I go and I work with Andre, and I'm these interactions that I'm having with these young men and their families. And the real draw was all of the things that Bob Hambric had given to me, that Lou Henson, that Jimmy Collins, that all of my coaches in Europe had given to me, I was able to give to these young men, including, my experiences growing up in Chicago. I was able to pour into these young men. And I got home after our first season, and I told my wife, I was like, okay, babe, like, I think I found it. She was like, what? I was like, we're going into coaching. And it's so funny how the universe works. So not even a week or two later, I get the call from a guy I knew. Well, a guy that knew TJ Wheeler, who was my teammate at Illinois, called me and said, hey, we have this opportunity for a college coach and for an athletic director. Would you be interested? Say, well, let me talk to my wife about this, because we were living in Florida. So now you're leaving Florida to move to Godfrey, Illinois, which for your listeners is about 30 minutes from St. Louis, of course, from St. Louis, Missouri, but in the Illinois side. So you're really in the middle of nowhere. The biggest thing there is they call Edwardsville, which is where the University of Southern Illinois, Edwardsville is. They call that the city. and Edwardsville is a lot smaller than Champaign.
Yeah.
So, when you wanted to go to the movies, if you were in Godfrey or Alton, you drove to Edwardsville to go to a movie theater. But my wife, being the loving and supporting person that she is, was like, hey, if this is what you want to do, this is where we're going. So we moved we actually moved to Edwardsville, but I was working at Lewis and Clark, which is about a 20-minute drive, to become the AD and the head coach, which was, I will tell this to people, if you cannot do both of those jobs, please don't, because that is a ton of work.
Mm-hmm. I did the exact same thing.
Oh,
I was
a ton of time away from your family.
Yeah, I was the head coach AD at Illinois Valley Community College about the same time you were down at Lewis and Clark.
That's where my brother went to school. My older brother played football there.
Yeah, I was there for actually 12 years, 5 years as an assistant, and 7 years as the head coach and AD.
Wow, so then you know completely what I mean. That's a lot of times. And so after being there, which was great time there. I loved the people there. Dr. Dale Chapman, who was the president at the time, was truly amazing. And that time there really taught me a lot about coaching, for one, because, you walk into this and you think especially coming from the professional level, but there's such a difference between playing and coaching. And being able to take the lessons that you've learned and break them down into digestible pieces for, college players.
Sure.
For 17, 18-year-olds, because they already think they know everything. So now you have to break all of the lessons you've learned down so you could teach it to those guys and really help them. And it was an amazing time. I loved it. My first year, we made it to the NJCAA National Championship or tournament. I lost in the Final Four on 2 buzzer beaters, which was hard. I was coach of the year that year for our region as well as for the NJCAA. Then the next year we were at Division II at that time. The next year I was runner-up for coach of the year. And then my last 3 years we moved up and played Division I JUCO basketball and did well. Finished, no lower than fourth, I believe it was. No lower than fourth in our conference, but we were in the conference with some heavy hitters. You'll know Southwest Missouri, Swick and, John Logan. And, so we were in a very, very tough conference. And to finish, in the upper half was good. And then I got the call from Howard Moore, who I had known Howard, of course, knew of Howard because we were in high school at the same time, being in Chicago and in the CPS. And then he was at Wisconsin when I was at Illinois. And then Howard was like, Deon, I'm revamping my squad, my staff. Would you be interested in making this jump? And I did. One, because I knew and respected Howard, but two, to be able to go back and coach literally in the neighborhood that I grew up was amazing, because UIC sits in the village. And now it's called University Village, because they've torn down all of the projects and they put up, townhomes and condos, and what used to be the meatpacking district back there are all these really nice condos. So an opportunity to be able to go back and teach in the area where I grew up was amazing to me. And I didn't. And again, moving from the junior college ranks to the Division I ranks, there's the level. Sorry, not ranks, but level. There's a difference in how things are done. But I think I learned quickly. I think we had a solid year. But as you know, Howard, during his time there, kind of suffered and didn't win very many games. So at the end of the year, even though we showed vast improvement, his last year, Howard was released. And, of course, that leaves you in limbo.
Mm-hmm.
But because I had just gotten there and had a couple of recruits that were really good, they brought in Steve McLean, who was the assistant at Iowa at the time, who kind of took the same track you and I did, started off at the junior college level, became a Division I head coach, and who is now the assistant at Indiana under Tom Crean. So Coach kept me on. We didn't have a very good year that first year. But during that time, I think the coaching bug kind of started to wane a little bit. I was missing tons of time with my family. Howard, their coaching styles were different. If you weren't working on something that you needed to be there, Howard wanted you to spend that time with your family. Being a strong family person, oriented person himself, he thought you would work harder if you were happy at home. And I happen to agree with him. Philosophy I shared with my assistant coaches when I was head coach, as well as when I was AD. But Steve Steve wanted you in the office. So we were literally in the office from 7 to 10, 7 to 9. That's 7 in the morning to 9 in the evening. All day, almost every day.
The hours that coaches put in behind the scenes and what I call the unseen hours is astronomical. When you talked about being away from your family, it's hard to relay that to people that aren't in the profession, but it really is that. Your family basically is your coaching staff and you're in the team you're coaching, because you're with them more than you are your own family.
Yes. That was one of the difficult things for me, because again, I was coming off of playing, and during that time, you're never at home because you're either training or you're in practice, or you're doing something, coming back and being an AD and head coach. Now, I'm never at home. My oldest daughter was playing basketball at the time. She had been in my camps since she was 7 years old, so I'd come home and do camps. So she was actually becoming a really good player. But then when I got to the Division I level, of course, now I'm never at her game, so I had missed her freshman, sophomore, and junior season because I was coaching. And at the end, I told Coach, I was like, you know what, I need to spend more time with my family because I had missed basically her whole high school career, and that just didn't sit right with me. And I was also doing a lot of things in the community at the time. One, doing some side things with the president, Tim Killeen at the University of Illinois. So I was doing some things in the community, and I wanted to do more of that, to be able to give back to my area where I had grown up. And because at that time, and I'm not sure if you remember, Tony, people were getting murdered left and right.
Yep.
And a lot of those murders were taking place in the Village or on the west side of Chicago where I grew up, and in Inglewood, which was another area where I grew up. So I'm looking at all of these kids dying in the area where I grew up, and I was like, okay, there's more that I could be doing. So there's more I could be doing outside, and there's more time I could be spending with my wife. So I resigned. And My wife thought I was crazy because I told I told her when we were actually on a flight back to Israel. She thought we were going on vacation to go see her family. And I told her, well, you might be reading a lot of things in the newspaper, or a lot of things may come across the wire, and you may be getting some phone calls. She was like, why? I was like, because I resigned. She's like, what? Are you crazy? Of course, like any mom, she was like, what are you going to do for work? What are you going to do for a salary? I'm like, well, thank God I played long enough. So we had some things, some money stashed that I have some time before we have to figure out what it is I have to do. We can take a little bit of a break and find the true north.
Yes.
And, she could have seen her face.
I'll bet. Last question I'm going to ask you before we wrap up here is, you mentioned something to me. You went back to UIC, back to in the village where you grew up, and then you leave and you talk about wanting to do stuff to give back. And in 2019, you were hired at the University of Illinois to be part of the development team as an associate director of development, but you're actually in the Illini Center in Chicago. Do you kind of feel like your life's come completely full circle now?
It's so funny you say that, because I was actually speaking with someone. I had a Zoom call with several potential donors, and I had Coach Underwood on as a guest with those potential donors. And someone asked me that very same thing. And yes, it has, because when I was playing, and no one understands how the university or how the athletic departments are funded. And I didn't at the time when I was playing. I didn't at the time when I retired, or even when I was coaching. I had no idea how these things. Oh yeah, I knew that there were donors, but I didn't realize that the athletic departments, and then at the University of Illinois, are all self-funded. Mm-hmm. So they're not getting funds from the university, or from the state. You have to fundraise for these things. So when Josh Whitman, the athletic director, asked me about this, we talked about how it works, what it is. So I feel more than honored to be able to come back and help all those kids that are like me. A lot of them, especially the basketball players, the football players, are coming from impoverished areas, single family homes with lives that, this is the way that they can change them. So yes, I have come full circle, and I feel great and honored to be able to do for these young people what previous donors had done for me, the gift officers.
Deon, I want to thank you for your time today and coming on the show. You gave us some great insight, and we could talk another hour on more stuff that you've done in your career and things you plan on doing. So I appreciate your time. I really do.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. And I hope this isn't the last time you have me on.
No, we need to do this again.
Great to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank everybody for listening to the show. If you want to get your name shouted out or ask a question, make sure you're a member of our Patreon group. For show notes, go to our website, beforethelightspod.com. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at Before the Lights Podcast. Thank you for listening to Before the Lights. I'm Tommy Canale, and we will talk to you next time.